Rain-slicked streets reflected the dim glow of streetlights as Emma, a struggling college student, pressed her only sandwich into the trembling hands of a shivering beggar, unaware that the man she fed was not a stranger, but a billionaire hiding behind rags and shadows. Her stomach growled in silent protest, yet she smiled softly, thinking kindness cost nothing while he stared at her, his heart pounding with a curiosity he had never felt before. She walked away, clutching her worn backpack, never imagining that the quiet gesture of sharing a lunch would spiral into a revelation at her graduation that would shock everyone. Who was the man she had helped that rainy afternoon? How would her life collide with his in ways she never dreamed of? And when the world finally learned the truth, could she handle the fortune, the fame, and the secrets waiting for her? Perfect. Let's dive into Scene 1, 800 words of fully immersive storytelling, packed with emotion, suspense, and foreshadowing. While weaving in backstory and staying deeply tied to the hook and title, Emma tightened the straps of her worn backpack as she trudged across the cracked sidewalks of downtown Chicago, the rain soaking through her thin jacket and dripping into her shoes. Her college graduation was less than a week away, yet she barely had energy to think about her cap and gown, her mind tangled in overdue assignments, part-time shifts, and the ever-looming question of how she would pay the rent. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her that she had skipped breakfast yet again, but she shoved the gnawing ache aside. She had bigger priorities. Turning a corner, she spotted him, a man huddled under a threadbare coat, his face obscured by a hood. The edges of his clothes were tattered, soaked through, and he shivered violently as the rain poured down around him. Emma's first instinct was hesitation, but then she remembered the sandwich in her bag, the one she had saved from last night's dinner. Without thinking twice, she knelt beside him, offering it with a warm, nervous smile. "Here, you can have this," she said, her voice soft against the patter of rain. The man looked up, startled. His eyes, sharp, intelligent, and impossibly blue, met hers, and for a fleeting moment the world seemed to hold its breath. He took the sandwich with hands that were surprisingly elegant, though dirty, and studied her with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Thank you," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "You're welcome," she whispered, already standing, trying to ignore the way her chest tightened. She had been taught to help when she could, even when she had little herself, but there was something about him that unsettled her, something she couldn't name. She turned and walked away, leaving him beneath the street lamp, silently watching as her figure disappeared into the night. Later that evening, Emma collapsed onto her small dorm bed, exhausted and wet, her mind replaying the encounter. She couldn't shake the feeling that the man had been different. There was something about the way he had looked at her, a weight in his gaze that hinted at secrets far beyond his ragged appearance. But she shrugged it off, blaming the long day and the cold rain, letting sleep pull her into a restless, dream-filled night. Meanwhile, in a high-rise apartment overlooking the city, the man, James Hawthorne, sat in silence, staring at the corner where the rain had soaked through his coat. A billionaire in hiding, he had built empires and yet lived alone, haunted by the memory of betrayal and mistrust. He had never asked for anyone's kindness, never needed it. And yet, the girl who had pressed a half-eaten sandwich into his hands had ignited a spark he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. Who was she? Why did she offer help with no hesitation, no question, no judgment? He replayed her small smile over and over, trying to decipher a meaning he wasn't ready to admit he craved. Flashbacks invaded his mind, memories of boardrooms, backstabbers, wealth that had brought him nothing but emptiness. And then her smile. Her soft, genuine concern stood out like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. It wasn't just kindness. It was courage, empathy, and a fearless heart. A combination James had almost forgotten existed in the world outside his luxurious but lonely prison. Emma's graduation day arrived sooner than she expected, and she moved through the ceremony in a daze, the cheers and applause of her classmates fading into a blur. She should have been thrilled, relieved, proud, but part of her couldn't stop thinking about her life outside the stage, the work ahead, the challenges she had overcome just to get here. And then, as the dean called her name and she walked across the stage, a hush fell over the crowd that made her pause. There in the front row, wearing a tailored suit that spoke of wealth she couldn't even imagine, sat a man whose presence made her stomach flip. James Hawthorne, the beggar from the rain, the billionaire she never knew she had touched. Their eyes met, and in that instant the world felt smaller. Sharper, more real. Her mind raced. Why was he here? How did he know about her graduation? And when she walked off the stage with her diploma in hand, would the truth about his identity shatter everything she had believed about chance, kindness, and fate? Questions swirled in Emma's mind like the storm that had first brought them together. How could a simple act of sharing a sandwich ripple into a moment that would change her life forever? And as James's gaze followed her across the auditorium, the faintest curve of a smile touched his lips, hinting that what began as a small act of generosity was about to spiral into something far bigger, far more shocking and far more transformative than either of them could imagine. After the ceremony, Emma found herself outside the grand hall, clutching her diploma like a lifeline. The crowd thinned, leaving only clusters of proud parents and relieved graduates, and for the first time in hours, she felt the weight of exhaustion settle fully onto her shoulders. Her mind wandered back to the rainy afternoon when she had shared her sandwich with a shivering stranger, and a shiver ran down her spine. Could it really be him? The man who had stared at her like he knew something she didn't? She barely had time to think before a deep voice cut through the quiet hum of the courtyard. "Emma Westbrook?" She turned sharply and froze. There he was, James Hawthorne, the man from the rain, now impeccably dressed, every inch the billionaire, his blue eyes as piercing and unreadable as they had been that night. He held out a hand, but she hesitated, unsure if she should be afraid, confused, or angry at herself for not recognizing him sooner. Yes, that's me," she stammered, her voice caught somewhere between curiosity and disbelief. He smiled, just enough to be disarming but not revealing, and said, "I wanted to congratulate you in person. You've accomplished something remarkable." Emma blinked, her mind racing. "Thank you. But I don't understand. How do you even know me?" The question came out softer than she intended, but there was a tremor in her voice, a mixture of awe and suspicion. James hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. "Do you remember the day in the rain?" "The sandwich?" Emma's heart skipped a beat. She nodded slowly, the memory rushing back in vivid detail. The smell of wet asphalt, the cold seeping through her jacket, the way he had stared at her so intently she'd almost forgotten to breathe. "Yes, I remember," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never forgotten," he admitted, his gaze steady, almost unsettling in its intensity. "Your kindness. It stayed with me, and I wanted to see the woman who showed it to me again." Emma felt a surge of emotions, embarrassment, curiosity, confusion, and something else she couldn't quite name. She had never imagined that a small act of compassion could ripple into the orbit of someone like him. And yet here he was, standing before her, a living contradiction. The destitute figure she had fed, transformed into a man whose wealth and influence could move mountains. She looked down at her hands, fiddling with the edge of her diploma. I didn't know who you were," she murmured. "I just did what I could. I didn't think it meant anything." James shook his head slowly. "It meant more than you'll ever know. I've spent my life surrounded by people who wanted things from me, people who smiled because of my money. But you gave without expecting anything in return. That's rare, Emma, and it's unforgettable." A memory flashed across her mind, her mother struggling to make ends meet, teaching her that small gestures of kindness were what made a person human. She had always tried to live by that principle, never realizing it would bring her into contact with someone like James. She swallowed hard, wondering if she was ready for the storm he seemed to promise, even in his calm demeanor. James's eyes softened for a fraction of a second before sharpening again. "There's something you should know," he said, his tone shifting subtly. "I'm not who I appeared to be that day. I have the means to change lives, Emma, and somehow fate chose you to cross my path before you ever knew who I really was." Emma's pulse quickened, a mixture of fear and exhilaration coiling in her chest. "Why me?" she asked, the single question on her mind, the one that refused to leave her lips since she first saw him in the auditorium. He stepped closer, his presence magnetic yet respectful, and answered in a voice that was almost confessional. "Because you reminded me that there's still good in the world, that someone can be selfless even when the odds are against them, and because I want to see how far that goodness can go, even when it collides with everything I've built." Her thoughts spun, a whirlwind of possibilities she wasn't ready to face. What did he mean by collide? How could a billionaire possibly intersect with her humble life without destroying everything she had fought for? And most importantly, could she trust him? The sound of applause from a nearby celebration snapped her back to the present. James extended his hand again, this time with quiet insistence. "Walk with me," he said. "There's a lot you don't know, and a lot that will surprise you." Emma hesitated, the rational part of her mind screaming to run, to retreat to the safety of her small apartment, to avoid the chaos this man promised. But something deeper, a spark of curiosity and courage she had always carried but rarely trusted, nudged her forward. She took his hand, letting him guide her through the courtyard. The rain still falling softly around them, and felt the first tremor of a life-changing revelation begin to shake her carefully constructed world. For James, every step beside her was a confirmation of a truth he hadn't dared to believe: that someone could touch his life with nothing but honesty and kindness. And for Emma, every word and gesture from him was a puzzle, a question mark, a doorway into a world she hadn't imagined, one where wealth, power, and secrets loomed, but where her own small actions could ripple into something enormous, something shocking, something unforgettable. Neither of them spoke of the future yet, but in that moment, the air between them was thick with unspoken possibilities, electric tension, and questions that demanded answers. Who would they become in each other's lives? What consequences awaited when the world discovered who James really was? And when the truth finally hit, would Emma's act of kindness be remembered as a small miracle? Or the spark that ignited a storm that no one saw coming? The evening air was crisp as Emma followed James through the city streets, her mind spinning faster than her feet could carry her. She had expected a casual conversation, a polite gesture of gratitude, maybe even a brief encounter she would forget. But instead she found herself walking beside a man who exuded power, influence, and mystery, each step punctuated by the realization that her life was about to tilt irreversibly. "Where are we going?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though her pulse hammered in her ears. James glanced at her, his gaze unreadable. "Somewhere you'll understand." He didn't elaborate, but the faint curve of a smile suggested he knew exactly what effect his cryptic words had. Emma wanted to protest, wanted to demand explanations, but curiosity, an unstoppable force, kept her moving forward. They arrived at a sleek black car, its surface gleaming under the streetlights. James opened the door for her, a gesture that felt both foreign and strangely comforting. Inside, the car smelled faintly of leather and citrus, a stark contrast to the rain-soaked streets outside. Emma sank into the seat, trying to steady her racing thoughts. How had a man she had once seen huddled in rags become this, someone she couldn't even begin to comprehend? As the city blurred past the tinted windows, James finally broke the silence. "You need to understand, Emma. The world you know is only a fraction of what exists. My life, my identity has been hidden for a reason, and yet the first person I trust enough to cross the threshold of that world is you." Emma turned to look at him, her mind reeling. "Why me? I'm just me. I've done nothing extraordinary." "You've done something extraordinary without even realizing it," James said quietly. "Kindness, selflessness, integrity. Those are rare commodities in a world where people are judged by wealth and status. You reminded me that there's more to life than power and money. That maybe I can believe in good again." Emma's heart ached at his words, part sympathy, part disbelief. She had never considered herself remarkable. Her life had been a series of struggles, loans, and part-time jobs, survival more than triumph. And yet here was a man cloaked in billions and secrets, telling her that something she had done on a rainy day had changed him. The car stopped in front of a towering glass building, its windows reflecting the city like 1,000 tiny mirrors. James led her inside, bypassing the usual formalities, until they reached a private elevator that hummed softly beneath their feet. With a press of a button, they ascended to a floor she couldn't even imagine existing. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, modern art lining the walls, and the faint scent of rare flowers lingering in the air. Emma's mouth went dry. "This is incredible," she whispered. James watched her reaction closely, his expression unreadable. "It's not just about what you see," he said. "It's about understanding why it's here. Every piece, every decision, every fortune I've built, it's a shield. A way to protect myself from the world and the people in it. Until you..." Emma's mind flashed back to that rainy afternoon. She could see him shivering, vulnerable, and she realized that behind every billionaire's mask there were hidden lives, hidden pain, hidden stories. Her small gesture had pierced that armor, and now she was inside a world she had never dreamed of entering. Before she could ask another question, James led her to a private dining area where a small table had been set, simple yet elegant, as if he had anticipated this moment long before it arrived. "Sit," he instructed gently. "We need to talk." Emma hesitated, then obeyed. She felt like a character in a story she didn't understand. Yet every word, every gesture seemed deliberate, calculated, and heavy with meaning. "Emma," James began, leaning forward slightly, "the truth is, I've been searching for someone who could remind me that life isn't just about what you own. That sometimes the smallest acts, like sharing a sandwich on a rainy day, can have consequences far beyond your imagination. That act, it led me to you, to tonight, to this moment. And soon everyone will know who I really am. I need to know if you're ready for that." Her stomach churned at his words. She had imagined surprise, maybe curiosity, but never this. The reality of his identity, the power he wielded, and the possibility that the world would scrutinize her for every choice she had made, overwhelmed her. "Ready?" she whispered almost to herself. I don't know if anyone could ever be ready for this." James's smile was faint but genuine. "That's what makes it real. That's what makes it life." He reached across the table, letting his hand hover just above hers, a connection that was electric yet tender. "But I promise you won't face it alone." Emma's thoughts swirled with questions she couldn't yet articulate. How would her friends and family react? How could she reconcile her simple life with the enormity of his world? And most pressing of all, what would happen when the world discovered that the beggar she had helped was the billionaire who now sat across from her, holding her gaze and her very future in his hands? Outside, the city continued its relentless rhythm, oblivious to the secret unfolding high above the streets. Inside, a quiet storm of revelations, emotions, and unspoken possibilities raged. Emma realized that life, like the rain-soaked streets where they first met, was unpredictable, messy, and beautiful, and that the collision of her world with his could change everything. And in that moment, as she looked at James Hawthorne, billionaire, mystery, and now a presence she could no longer ignore, she knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, the campus buzzed with the excitement of graduation day celebrations. Emma stood among the crowd of students and families, her cap slightly askew, her gown clinging damply to her frame after a sudden spring shower. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the night before. James Hawthorne, the billionaire she had once thought was a beggar, revealing that small act of kindness had brought them together. She still couldn't fully grasp it, how her humble life had intersected with his towering world. But the truth was no longer something she could ignore. As she adjusted her cap nervously, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Parents nudged each other, students craned their necks, and cameras flashed toward the stage. Emma's pulse quickened. Something was happening, something she hadn't anticipated. She looked around and then froze. There, walking up the steps of the auditorium, was James. Not the disguised, distant figure from the night before, but fully revealed, confident, polished, and impossible to ignore. His presence radiated power, but there was a gentleness in his expression that tugged at her heart. Whispers ran through the audience as James approached the podium, commanding attention without even speaking. Emma felt every pair of eyes shift toward her, and a strange mix of fear and anticipation coiled in her stomach. Why was he here? What did he intend to do? Her diploma suddenly felt heavier in her hands, laden with uncertainty, excitement, and dread. James took the microphone, his deep voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "Good morning, graduates, families, and friends," he began, his tone calm yet compelling. "Today is a day of achievement, celebration, and reflection. But it's also a reminder that the smallest acts can have consequences far greater than we ever imagine." Emma's heart skipped. He was talking about her. The memory of sharing her lunch in the rain flashed vividly, and she remembered how unremarkable it had seemed at the time. But now everyone's attention was on her. James smiled faintly, his piercing eyes locking onto hers. One graduate here did something extraordinary without expecting recognition. She extended kindness to a stranger, not knowing that the stranger would one day stand before her, not as someone in need, but as someone whose life she would unknowingly touch forever. Gasps rippled through the audience. Murmurs became louder. Emma's mind raced. Could he mean her? She felt the heat of every gaze upon her, the realization that her life, her simple gesture, was about to be exposed in a way she had never imagined. James stepped down from the podium, moving toward her with measured steps. "Emma Westbrook," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "The girl who shared her lunch on a rainy day, the girl who reminded me that kindness still exists, is here today." Emma's knees weakened, her hands trembling as the audience erupted into applause. Cameras flashed, friends and families craned their necks, and she realized the truth she had suspected. The beggar she had helped had been James Hawthorne, billionaire, philanthropist, and now the center of a story that would shock everyone. James extended his hand, not for show, but as a bridge between their worlds. "Emma," he continued, "and what you did that day, it changed my life. And today I want the world to know the impact of a single act of generosity, courage, and selflessness. Will you join me in proving that goodness can shape destinies?" Emma swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She could run, retreat to the safety of anonymity, or she could step forward, embrace the truth, and face the storm that would inevitably follow. And deep inside, she knew there was no turning back. Her voice was barely audible, trembling yet resolute. "Yes," she said. "I'll join you." The auditorium erupted again, louder this time as cameras zoomed in, capturing the improbable, breathtaking truth. The poor student who had shared her lunch with a beggar, unaware he was a billionaire, now standing center stage with the man whose life she had unknowingly transformed. Faces in the crowd reflected astonishment, admiration, disbelief, and awe. Everyone was shocked, not just by the revelation, but by the undeniable proof that one small act could ripple into a life-changing moment. James guided her to the podium, and together they faced the audience. "Let this be a reminder," he said, his voice ringing with sincerity, "that no act of kindness is ever wasted, and that life can surprise us in the most extraordinary ways. Never underestimate the power of your heart. It can change the world." Emma's mind swirled with emotions: shock, awe, fear, exhilaration. But at the core, she felt a deep sense of pride. She had acted without expectation, without thought of reward, and yet the consequences had been far greater than she could have imagined. The girl who had shared a simple sandwich had now stepped into a reality that defied comprehension. Yet she stood tall, her courage and kindness shining brighter than ever. Later, as the crowd dispersed, friends and family coming to congratulate her, James walked beside her quietly. "You handled that beautifully," he said softly. "I couldn't imagine anyone else by my side for this moment." Emma smiled, the tension of the morning slowly melting into a warm sense of wonder. "I never imagined my life could change like this, because of something so small." James took her hand, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forged in rain, hardship, and unexpected revelation. Sometimes the smallest acts create the biggest storms and the most unforgettable moments. And as they walked into the bright, unpredictable future together, Emma realized that her act of kindness had not only transformed James's life, it had changed her own forever. The world would remember this story. The world would be shocked. And yet the heart of it all remained simple, pure and unbreakable. Generosity, courage, and the unassuming power of one ordinary girl who dared to care.